Good morning and welcome back to Black Bear Forge. A few months ago, one of the viewers named Matt sent me this ball peen hammerhead, which if I remember correctly he said was his father's, and he wanted something special done with it. So he has commissioned me to make him a small camp hatchet using the ball peen hammer. I had another similarly sized ball peen hammer, and I made this little camp hatchet as a test. And I think it's exactly what he was asking for. So I'm going to show you today how I turned something like this into something like this. It seems like most people that make axes and tomahawks from old ball peen hammers draw out the ball peen into a spike, which is really a very classic design and looks pretty cool, and I've done them that way before. But when Matt sent me this hammerhead, he specifically asked that the ball peen be turned into a flat-faced hammer so that it was an axe on one side, hammer on the other, and that would be a more useful camp tool. The spike really is not very practical. It's more of a weapon at that point. With a hammerhead, this is a tool, and that will be a much more useful thing for him. So the first thing I want to do is forge that hammerhead. So we're just going to forge this down to a square initially. And it'll make for a fairly small hammerhead if you just leave it at this. I need to get a new handle on this hammer. Even my tape is coming off. Next thing I'll do is I'll put a drift in, and then I'll flatten up this end a little bit so it's not ball shaped. So the drift in there, that gives me a good handle and helps keep me from squishing the eye as I work that down to a flat face instead of a ball peen. I'm going to knock the corners off, just give it a nice chamfer, a nice look for this style of hammer and axe. And that's pretty much it for now. I'll probably clean that up a little bit later. I'm not going to do a lot of drifting to this. I don't want to change the character too much. But I am going to want it to be a little bit larger eye. Ball peen hammers have such small eyes. Now, one of the reasons we went ahead and did that face first is because now it really fits my V-bit tongs quite nicely. But for now, this will be the last drifting, then I'll forge the blade. This hammer is also, at some point in time, had somebody grind a handle flush or sand a handle flush and had a flat spot at the top. So I'm trying to kind of recover from that. But it also has the Stanley logo on it. I'm going to try very hard not to destroy that. Just gives it a certain amount of class, I think. I'm going to start spreading the hammer face widthwise. I'm using this diagonal peen hammer for that. This is a real good use for it. I'm just working as much as I can right in the center. and work from both sides to try and keep everything even. Pays to look at it and make sure things are going straight. This will invariably end up with a cold shut on the very edge that will need to be ground off. Now I've got a pretty good spread going on this. I think I'm going to take it to the Little Giant and draw that blade out longer. But I want to make sure I've got something starting to look like an axe blade before I do that, or it'll end up long and skinny. I think we're getting some twist here, so I'm going to need to take that out. That'll be easier done once I get it thinner. Now because this side drops, or when I drop this, it curves this back, I'm going to try and draw that out lengthwise a little bit as I spread this. I'm just using the corner of my hammer because it's nicely rounded, and it gets in there better than trying to do this with a cross peen. As I mentioned, this has a Stanley logo on it. I want to make sure that it's up in the finished hammer, so I'll turn it upside down. I like the blade to drop from center. You can certainly do them symmetrical. I think I'm going to go to the treadle hammer and do that with a fuller. It'll be neater and cleaner. Of course, this always twists the blade up and squishes the eye a little bit. So do that before you get the thing almost finished. We still have plenty of time to redrift the eye, straighten the blade. But I think I'll start with drifting the eye at this point. Since the underside of the eye is the thing that I've messed up the most, that's where I'm going to start drifting. This also helps move that blade down and further drop it from the center line because it's where most of the force is going. This is a good time to work on straightening the blade. You'll straighten it several more times, but if you keep it straight, it's easier. So another drifting from this side. on the outside to get that to fit the drift a little bit better. And again, a quick straightening. Now if I try to drift this way over the hardy hole, I'm going to end up messing things up and bending that blade back the other way. But by doing it over the vise, you can leave that eye unsupported and hook the blade over the edge. It's a little bit less likely to bend things up. But if I bend that hammer head up, I'll be okay with that, because it was drooping down just a little bit anyways, and I'd rather have it come back up in line. So have that little bit of the eye that was previously ground flat by somebody that I want to work on. Sorry, stepped out of the camera shot to go back to the vise. Okay, so now it's going to be time to finish the blade, then we'll see if we need to drift again after that. Just want to take any rough spots out at this point. Smooth up the blade. There are a few hammer marks right up in the areas of the cheeks there. I'd like to smooth those out, but it's hard to do that at the corner of the anvil. So I'm going to go to the treadle hammer again, I think. For that, I'm just going to use these nice big fullers. You don't have to do this if you don't have a treadle hammer. If you have the fullers and a striker, you can do it at the anvil. Those little rough spots weren't actually going to hurt anything. I just prefer to eliminate them if I can. And while I'm at the treadle hammer, I might as well put my touch mark on here. I'm going to put the drift back in. And that gives you a real good reference for whether or not the blade is straight. And a pretty good handle to hold on to while you fix whatever it is you see. Just don't obliterate your touch mark, so be gentle. It's getting pretty darn good. And the drift is getting pretty darn hot, even through this glove. I think the last thing I'm going to do is drift it one more time from the top, just to be sure. It looks like I need to dress the hammer face a little bit. It's got one slightly out of square corner. And one last look to make sure everything looks straight and in line and just the way we want it. And then we're going to bring it back up to heat one last time. I'm going to bring this up to heat and then allow it to air cool or normalize And this will allow me to check to see if it is air hardening steel, and if not, then we will probably oil quench it. So the question is, did this get hard, or is it just nicely normalized? That files quite easily, so it is definitely not air hardening steel. It's normalized, it should be stress-free and ready to go. Well, our axe has been ground and cleaned up to get any oddball hammer marks off, clean up the profile a little bit. I'm not really worried about taking all the hammer marks out. It's not meant to be polished and shined up and all that kind of stuff. It's just meant to be clean so it works well, and a smooth surface does work better when you're chopping. But now it is time to harden and temper. And today I'm going to go ahead and harden in the forge, since this is more of a typical forge project and something that some of you might be doing. So hardening in the forge is more appropriate. The fact that I don't know what material it is means I can't set a perfect critical temperature in the electronic oven anyways. So just going to magnetic and then a little above, quenching in oil and seeing what happens is about the best we can do. Once we've done that, we'll test it with a file again. If it's hard, we're good to go. If it's not quite hard, we'll either need to get it hotter before we quench, or we'll need to quench in water. If we have to go that route, we'll renormalize it before we try a second hardening to take any stress from the first attempt out. But I suspect this will harden just fine in oil at a fairly high cherry heat, but not necessarily into the orange range. Now I'm not going to get the forge up to full heat here. I just want to soak these for a while, let them come up to temperature slowly. I'll relight the forge several times during the process to help even out the heat. And I'll keep turning them over. Make sure they heat evenly that way as well. That helps prevent warpage. These are getting very close. Nice even heat, come up real slow. Check them for non-magnetic, and they are non-magnetic. I'm going to quench the whole thing so that the hammer head gets hard as well. I'm going to get it fairly cool in the quench oil. It's okay if it's still warm, but if the oil's still sizzling on the surface, it's not cool enough yet. Now I want to check and see if it got hard. It's pretty good. It just lightly files with a file, which may be all the harder it really needs to be in the long run. I'm going to temper it anyways just to be sure. Chances are it won't get any softer than that, but tempering will make sure there's no excess stress from the hardening. But for an axe like this, being able to sharpen it with a file is a good thing. So the fact the file cuts it is okay. So after an hour in the toaster oven at 450, I'm going to put a little beeswax on this. And then I'm going to let it cool. And then we'll do the final light grinding and sharpening. Let's cool down a little bit more. That has changed very little since we hardened it. It was already less than brittle hard then, but just right for sharpening with a file, and it still is. So I think we did a perfect job of hardening and tempering based on what I think a tool like this should be. So let's go give it a last cleanup and a sharpening. So I don't want too acute of an edge, too flat a bevel. I want it a little blunter because, again, it's a camp axe, not a woodworking tool per se. So it's going to have that convex grind that we've talked about before, and more like a 35-degree angle than the 25-degree angle that I put on my woodworking tools. And I'm going to set that up on the higher speed grinder with a coarse belt and just be real careful not to overheat it. And once I go to finer belts and the blade is getting thinner, we'll move over to the slower grinder. Dip the edge to protect it and to protect whoever puts the handle on it so they don't cut themselves. Well, there we have a completed axe head from a repurposed ball peen hammer. I should have weighed the hammer first, but I forgot to do that. The finished head comes in at 1 pound and 4 ounces. So it's a 20-ounce head. That's a real good size for a lightweight camp axe. Something that would even be packable if you're into packing an axe around with you. Should be a real good functional axe. Oh, actually the weight's on here. I can still see the old Stanley mark and where it says 24. So we've lost 4 ounces from the original head. Some of that was probably lost before it ever showed up in my shop, just from rust and cleaning and redressing the hammer over the years because it's an older hammer. But anyways, that's a completed project, ready to go off to Matt. I should have that in the mail on Monday morning for you. I hope you enjoy it. I hope this is what you were hoping I would do for you. I have another one here that I did as a test piece to make sure that what I was going to do for Matt was going to work out. Same size head, pretty much comes out to be the same axe. I'm going to go ahead and put a handle on this one. One of the advantages of the ball peen hammer style axes, the modified hammers, is they fit the ball peen hammer handle, so it's easy to find a handle. This one's had grubby blacksmith all over it, so I'm going to need to sand it down. But I think I'll just handle it with that. That's a good handle for the axe side, good handle for the hammer side. Ought to be a great little camp axe, and I'll put that on the Etsy shop if anybody's interested. As always, I hope you found this video interesting and can give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Love it if you'd hit that subscribe button so you know what's coming up and when we put new videos out. But in the meantime, do get out to your shop, stay safe, wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.